resources. South Africa is extremely strong in mining or natural resources. So each country has some kind of a competitive advantage. So because of that, there will be global trades happening. So these are the typical components of a country. And if you can understand the interrelationship of these components, you understand how country functions. And if any one component starts malfunctioning, the whole cycle gets disturbed. In last 4 or 5 years before the current government, what was the major component of malfunction which was happening? It was the government. Because the government policies were not pro-growth policies. Government policies were inclusive growth policies. That means they wanted the lower part of India, the rural part of India, to grow aggressively than the urban part of India. Now that policy was correct, mind you. Each government will have its own policy. That policy was correct. Probably what backfired was the fact that they wanted to give a lot of freebies and instigate consumption demand by distributing frees, which made our labor force unproductive, which increased the unproductive cost in the economy. So because that government factor became so inefficient, the whole cycle got disturbed and gradually our GDP got reducing. Let's take now whatever has happened has happened. Now we are into a corrective mode by new government. Now let's take an example of household. Why household is such an important catalyst of growth in India? Because of the demographic profile. Because of the fact that we are young people, India is a young country, and there is a huge appetite to consume these days. So this is one of the lead component of the overall growth. But suppose something happens there. Obviously this whole structure will get disturbed once again, and we will not witness a handsome growth in our country. So what are the major components what are the major parameters of measuring the healthiness of an economy? The rate of economic growth, the rate of inflation, unemployment, trade with other countries. So all the components should show a healthy sign, then only the economy will grow as a healthy child. So let me just pen down a couple of, I hope the basics of economics you guys, you have done in your academics as well. And by going through this presentation, I think by this time you know what basic economics is and what basic macroeconomics is. So these are the various components which will help you to make a wise judgment about where your economy is going. And if you can track these components wisely, you will get a fair estimation of where the economy is going. The most important is the GDP. So what kind of GDP we are witnessing for ourselves? Is there a significant growth happening, or we are witnessing a degrowth scenario? What is the inflation rate going on? What is an exchange rate? An exchange rate is a beautiful instrument which captures the relative strength of one economy vis-a-vis the other. We are going to discuss this in detail. What is the level of unemployment? Because ultimately the consumption demand or the household demand will be only generated if there is healthy employment in the system. If there are too many unemployed people, you can't expect a consumption demand happening. What kind of policies framework we are living in? When we talk about policies, we are talking about both monetary policies and the fiscal policy. Monetary policy, which is typically controlled by the Reserve Bank of India, and fiscal policy is the one which is controlled by the government. And the last, which is the most important thing, is what kind of demographic profile we have in our country. I think someone has the mic on. If I can mute the mic of that person, please. I just get disturbed, nothing else. Yeah. Thanks. I hope you can hear me. Great. And the most critical thing is, that's okay, Daljit, no problem, don't mind. The last critical thing is the demographic profile. If you can track the demographic profile, the changing demographic profile of our country, you will be able to have a strong vision about where the market is going. Let me give you an example. The other mentor of our academy, Pankaj, he is a very strong believer of a new theme in India. And we are just trying to work out, we are just trying to do research on this theme, that for him, coming 5 years, one of the biggest growth driver for India is going to be the girls' population. You know the reason why? Because if you see the action overall in terms of policy, in terms of social structure, there is a lot of pro-girls action in the country now. Absolutely. Do you agree with this? How many people agree with this? That we are seeing a lot of pro-girls environment in India now, where there is definitely for everyone, for policymaker, for businessmen, for a social structure, there is a soft corner for girls now. And there are a lot of companies which are trying to focus on building products which will meet the aspirations of girls. How many people agree to this? If you agree, just say yes on the chat, in the chat window. How many people believe that the products which would be girls-oriented products, the products which will cater to the aspiration of women in India, they are the one which is going to see a huge growth in coming few years? So that's the demography, right? That's the demography. That's the change in the social structure of our country. So you as a visionary, what you would like to do is, find out a company, a stock, a sector, or a business opportunity which is focused on catering to this women population. And that's where the growth is. Can you see my video by any chance? Can you guys see my video as well? Oh, you can't see my video? Okay. I thought you were looking at my video as well. Okay, let me just start my cam. Okay. Can you see my video now? Oh, great. Thank you. So it is important for us to understand the overall demographic profile of our country, or any country for that matter, before we make a sensible judgment about the growth of that country. Okay. Now, let's talk about GDP. You know, this is a slightly complicated, now we are getting into the technical discussion of individual subject matter. Since we will be giving you the document anyways, so I'm not going to touch each and every small point in these, because you know this will become a very, very technical lecture. I'm here to talk about the practical side of market. So GDP, technically, you know, you can measure GDP in these three forms. What is GDP? You know, if I can ask you कि तुम्हारे घर का GDP क्या है? Forget about India. If I can ask you that हमारे घर में अगर हमको अपने घर का GDP कैलकुलेट करना है तो हम कैसे कैलकुलेट करेंगे? There are three ways I can do that. So what is the full form of GDP? Gross Domestic Product. You know, there are three ways we can calculate the GDP. First is consumption base. मैंने कितना कंजम्पशन किया है, मैंने, मेरे परिवार ने, मेरे फैमिली मेंबर्स ने लाके, मेरे घर का डेकोरेशन ने, एवरीथिंग इंक्लूडेड, मैंने कितना कंजम्पशन किया है. दैट कंजम्पशन combined is my gross domestic product, right? The other way is that मैंने कितना इन्वेस्ट किया है, because whatever money I will have in the form of my asset. So that asset can be my house, my cash, that asset can be my iPad. So all these becomes my asset. The third way is that मैंने कितना, just a minute, sorry. The third way is that मुझे कितना सैलरी मिलता है, मतलब मेरा इनकम कितना है. मैं बिजनेस करता हूं तो मेरे बिजनेस में इनकम कितनी है, अगर मैं जॉब करता हूं तो मुझे सैलरी कितना मिलता है. So there are different ways you can arrive at that magical number of GDP, that what value you are adding in the society would be either by accumulating your expenditure, by accumulating your investments, or by, which is your assets, and by accumulating your incomes, right? अब इंडिया पर्सपेक्टिव से सोचो the same concept, कि आज हमें अगर अपना GDP कैलकुलेट करना है तो हम कैसे कर सकते हैं? One way is that what is the market value of the final goods and services which is produced for our country. Two is what is the consumption. That consumption will also include how much government is purchasing. Okay, consumption is not just about retail consumption. Consumption is also consumption by the government. How much we are net exporting or importing from globally. So our consumption plus net export, plus minus export. So if you're net importing nation, obviously our consumption plus our import is well. So this is basically how much, the value of overall goods and services produced in our country. So if you want to give equation to this, so GDP is equal to consumption plus investments plus government expenditures plus export minus import. Right? Now let me take this to the next level, this discussion. Obviously, theoretically, as I said, that you will be given material, so you will know about these theories. And there are ample websites where you will get access to theories. My role is to give you a practical perspective of everything. So when I talk about consumption, investments, government expenditure, and net export, each country has its own area of specialization. Correct? And one factor is always the need for any country, or for that matter, in that particular phase of that country. If I can ask you, China till 5 years ago or 3 years ago was driven by which factor? Was it investment? Was it government spending? No. The major, so the major driver of China as a country was export minus import, right? So it's always an export which is driving country China. Now from being an export country, they are not trying to become a consumption-led country because their per capita income has grown so much that their internal consumptions is helping their GDP to get boosted. What is the typical characteristic of India? Is India a government expenditure dependent country? Is India an investment dependent country? Or are we a net export or import oriented country? What kind of country we are? Can anyone would like to answer this question? What kind of country we are? Are we government spending oriented country? Shanti Brata, are you sure about it? Really our government is spending on us, you think? Is the government really spending on infrastructure? If you see, that's the biggest complaint most of the time, that where is the government? Where are the dams? Where are the roads? Where are the flyovers? So actually our government doesn't spend. When I talk about government spending, I'm talking about the capital spendings, not spending to pay interest, not spending to pay salary to central government employees. You're right. It's a consumption-driven economy. Why are people so bullish on India? Because it's a consumption-driven economy. The kind of population we have, the kind of youth per base we have, people are extremely positive about India because we are going to lead. Our GDP is going to be driven by consumption. One of the major reasons why our GDP fell in the last 4-5 years? Because government, they wanted to instigate consumption, right, by giving free money through schemes like Narega. Now it became counterproductive. There was increase in consumption, but that was an unproductive consumption which went up, and the government expenditure got reduced because the productive government expenditure got reduced and it got channelized to unproductive government expenditures. A freebie or a subsidy is unproductive government expenditure. So net your GDP saw a minus effect than a positive effect of the consumption growth. Your investment scenario got reduced because of a lot of policy decisions like GAP or a lot of policy decisions like retrospective tax discourage investors to stay in India. So people were moving out of this country thanks to the way policies were framed in our country. And the interest rate scenario was also high. So that was also not helping the consumption demand in India to grow. So net, if you see, there was negative effect in each and everything. So our GDP went down. Is this clear with everyone? Is this clear? समझ पा रहे आप लोग कि मैं क्या बोल रहा हूँ? So when I'm thinking from a GDP perspective, whenever you have doubt in your mind about economics and you think about GDP, think about from these component perspective. कि अभी मेरा इकोनॉमी में कंजम्पशन कैसा कर रहा है? इन्वेस्टमेंट सिनेरियो कैसा है, गवर्नमेंट प्रोडक्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट्स कर रहा है कि नहीं कर रहा है, और हमारा एक्सपोर्ट इंपोर्ट का क्या सिनेरियो है. Now let's check the country today. What is the consumption scenario? Now the retail consumption is always dependent on the interest rate in our country, correct? मतलब आप हाउसिंग लोन लोगे, गाड़ी लोन